My name is Linda Harris, and I'm 68 years old. I never thought I'd be starting over at this age, but life has a way of tearing the ground out from under you when you least expect it. The day it happened is etched into me like a scar. I was sitting in that quiet office, the lawyer's voice steady and sharp, as he read out my late husband's will. I had braced myself for grief, for sadness, for memories of the life we built together. But what I wasn't ready for was betrayal. My daughter was named the heir to almost everything the family home. The accounts, the assets. When my name finally came, all that was left for me was a cabin in the mountains of Montana. Not a sanctuary, not a treasure, just a decaying old place I had never even stepped inside. I sat there frozen, pretending to be calm, while inside my chest a storm raged. I wanted to believe it was a mistake, that somewhere in those papers there had to be more. But there wasn't. I felt every eye in the room on me, waiting for my reaction. And I gave them nothing, because the words I wanted to say could never be spoken aloud without breaking me in half. It's a strange thing. Realizing your own child is smiling while you're being stripped of the life you built. The people I loved most in the world looked relieved, as if I had finally been pushed out of the picture. And that moment, as crushing as it was only the beginning. Because what I found in that rundown cabin would turn everything upside down. And that's where my story truly begins, where family betrayal took on a meaning I could never have imagined. For 42 years, I built my life around the man I loved and the family we raised together. I believed marriage was a promise of stability, of standing side by side through storms and sun alike. I gave myself fully to that vision. I poured everything I had into our home, our children, and the small, ordinary routines that held us together. I thought when my husband passed, I would at least be left with the dignity of belonging, of being recognized for the life we built. But when the will was read, that illusion shattered. My daughter's smile told me more than the lawyer's words ever could. She had won. She had taken everything. While my heart crumbled, hers lifted in delight. I sat in silence, pretending composure, though inside I was drowning in humiliation. The people I loved most had not only shut the door on me, they had locked it. From that moment on, the balance of my own household shifted. I became a guest in the space I once commanded. My bedroom, where I had shared decades of laughter, sorrow, and whispered dreams, was suddenly reassigned. I was moved into the guest room, stripped of ownership, as though my history in that house had been erased with one simple decision. At the dinner table, I no longer led the conversation or even held my seat at the head. That place was taken by my daughter's carefully polished centerpieces and her husband's booming voice, drowning out whatever I might have offered. I cooked, I cleaned, I served. And when guests arrived, I vanished into the background, a shadow slipping through the hallways. The house where I once nurtured every soul had turned me into a ghost, haunting its corners. Each day chipped away at me one small humiliation at a time until I no longer recognized myself. The hardest part wasn't losing the home. It was losing my place in the family I had raised. My daughter's kindness came wrapped in a cruel disguise. She offered me smiles and words about independence, but what she really meant was exile. Her husband echoed the same rehearsed lines, talking about how it would be good for me to stand on my own 2 feet, as if I hadn't stood for decades, holding up everyone else's weight. Then came the moment I can never forget. One morning, I opened the door of what used to be my bedroom and saw my suitcases waiting in the hallway. Packed, zipped, as if my life had been neatly folded and placed aside, ready to be removed. My daughter kissed my cheek, smiling as though nothing were unusual. She told me it was time, that I should go see the cabin, that it was my place now. Her husband handed me an envelope with the keys and directions, his eyes heavy with finality. I remember standing there, stunned, my entire life condensed into 2 suitcases and a set of keys to a house I had never seen. My daughter hugged me, stiff and rehearsed, already finished before it began. In that moment, I understood the truth I had been avoiding. I was no longer welcome in the home I had built with my own hands. At 68 years old, I was being forced out. And that was how my journey to the cabin began, the place I never asked for, but the only thing left that was mine. What I found waiting for me there would change everything. The morning I found my bags waiting in the hallway, I understood what exile must feel like. 2 suitcases sat neatly zipped, as if they had been preparing for my departure long before I had. They weren't just luggage, they were a verdict. A quiet declaration that my time in my own home had ended. My daughter's farewell was a performance. She pressed a kiss against my cheek, her smile carefully arranged, her hug stiff and short, as though checking off a duty rather than expressing love. Her husband stood close by, an envelope in his hand, already holding the keys to the place they were sending me. They called it independence, as though this decision was a gift. But I knew better. What they called freedom was nothing more than a polite form of banishment. I remember gripping the handles of those bags and walking down the front steps of the house I had built from the ground up. Every step echoed like a sentence being carried out. Behind me stood decades of meals, laughter, birthdays, and Christmas mornings. Ahead of me stretched silence. My car, an old sedan my husband once bought me, suddenly felt like my only companion. The drive began with the familiar streets of Helena Ridge, but soon even that disappeared. The highway stretched out endlessly, the towns growing smaller, the signs fewer. My phone signal dropped to 1 bar, then none at all. I stared at the blank screen, realizing the world I knew was vanishing behind me, and no one was left on the other end to call. The land opened into wide plains, the sky vast and indifferent. Hours blurred together, each mile heavier than the last. The foothills gave way to winding mountain roads, switchbacks that curled like questions I couldn't answer. Gravel replaced pavement, and then gravel thinned into dirt. The sun lowered, shadows stretching long across the empty road, making me feel as though I was driving not toward a destination, but deeper into isolation. With every turn, the weight inside me grew. Betrayal by strangers is painful enough, but betrayal by your own blood is a wound that never truly heals. My daughter had not only taken what belonged to me, she had erased me, packed me neatly into suitcases, and shipped me off to a place I'd never seen. By the time the last light of day clung to the mountains, the directions led me to the edge of a dense forest. There, at the end of the road, I saw the cabin that was now mine. Its silhouette stood tired and crooked, waiting in silence. I pulled over and cut the engine, staring at the dark shape ahead. I didn't know it yet, but what waited inside those walls would unravel everything I thought I knew about my husband, my daughter, and myself. By the time I reached the end of that winding dirt road, the mountains had swallowed the last of the daylight, and there it was, the cabin, my so-called inheritance. At first glance, It looked abandoned, as if it hadn't seen life in decades. The porch sagged dangerously to one side. Boards bowed under years of neglect. Shingles were missing from the roof, jagged gaps like broken teeth grinning down at me. A window pane was cracked, covered in a crude patch of plywood that rattled in the wind. I sat in the car for a long moment, staring at it, feeling the weight of betrayal settle deeper in my chest. Was this really all I was worth after a lifetime of devotion? With a heavy breath, I forced the rusted key into the lock. The door groaned open, and I braced myself for dust, cobwebs, the stale stench of abandonment. But what met me on the other side stole the air from my lungs. The cabin was alive. Polished hardwood floors gleamed under soft rugs. A leather sofa faced a stone fireplace, already stacked neatly with logs ready to burn. The kitchen sparkled with stainless steel appliances, spotless, as though someone had just wiped them down. Warm light glowed from the lamps, casting the room in a golden softness that felt almost welcoming. But it wasn't welcoming, it was unsettling. On a table near the window sat a single-place setting, a plate with crumbs of bread, a half-full mug of coffee, and an open notebook, as if someone had just stepped away and would return at any moment. My eyes caught the writing inside, and my heart nearly stopped. The handwriting precise, slanted, was one I knew better than my own. My husband's. I traced the ink with trembling fingers, my pulse thundering in my ears. At the top of the page was a date. Only 3 days earlier, my husband had been buried, mourned, spoken of in the past tense. Yet here was his hand, alive on paper. The entry was short but haunting. Linda will be arriving soon. Everything must be ready. God, I hope she understands. The room seemed to close in around me, pressing with a silence that felt heavy and unnatural. My knees weakened, and I clutched the back of a chair, struggling to steady myself. Was he alive? Had he been here, waiting for me? Or was I standing in the middle of a lie too big to comprehend? All I knew was that this cabin held more than broken wood and old memories. It held secrets, and I was about to discover the most devastating one of all. I should have walked out of that cabin the moment I saw his handwriting. I should have turned the key, left everything behind, and driven until the road disappeared under me. But I didn't. Fear, curiosity, maybe both pulled me deeper. My eyes landed on a bookshelf tucked in the corner, crooked but oddly placed. When I brushed my hand along its edge, it moved. A section of the wood swung outward with surprising ease, revealing a narrow passage dimly lit by a faint strip of bulbs along the floor. My breath caught in my throat. I stepped inside. The hidden room was nothing like the rest of the cabin. The warmth of rugs and polished wood was gone, replaced by cold concrete and the sharp scent of paper and dust. The walls were covered with photographs, maps, and newspaper clippings connected by strings of red and blue. Faces stared back at me, politicians, businessmen, names I recognized from the news. And at the center of it all was my son-in-law. His image circled in dark ink, lines stretching outward like veins from a poisoned heart. I moved closer. Notes scrawled in my husband's hand filled the margins. Dates, account numbers, arrows pointing to shell companies and offshore accounts. My stomach turned as I pieced it together, a web of corruption stretching far beyond my family's home. Government contracts, laundered money, and Grant, my daughter's husband, at the core of it. On the desk sat a single envelope, my name written across it in a script I knew as intimately as my own. My hands shook as I tore it open. Inside was a letter. He was alive. The words blurred as I read them again and again, refusing to believe. He hadn't died of a heart attack. He had staged it. He had buried himself in lies to survive after uncovering the corruption. He explained how he had been followed, threatened, watched, how he disappeared so they couldn't erase him. And now, through this cabin, he was leaving everything to me, the evidence, the choice, the burden. My knees weakened, and I sat heavily in the chair. I had mourned him, buried him, wept for him, and here he was, alive in ink, handing me a responsibility I never asked for. My husband hadn't just abandoned me to grief, he had thrust me into danger. The last line of his letter burned into me. You are stronger than you know. Trust no one, not even Caroline. Tears blurred my vision, not from relief, but from a sorrow I couldn't name. He had trusted me with truth, but in doing so, he had stolen the life I thought I had lived. I didn't know what was worse, the betrayal of my daughter, or the resurrection of a man who had chosen secrets over me. Then I heard it, the crunch of tires on gravel, low voices outside, doors slamming shut. I moved to the window, pulling the curtain back just enough to see. 2 black SUVs had parked in front of the cabin. Men in dark clothing stepped out, moving with a silence that only comes from training. They weren't hikers. They weren't lost. They were here for me. The letter slipped from my hand as footsteps approached the porch. The door rattled under the force of a boot. I remembered my husband's words. This house contains everything you need. And just like that, I knew this was no longer about grief. This was survival. The door shook under the weight of boots, the sound of splintering wood echoing through the cabin. My heart slammed against my ribs. I remembered the hidden tunnel my husband had mentioned, and without another thought, I pulled the lever behind the desk and slipped inside. The tunnel was narrow and cold, the walls brushing my shoulders as I ran. Every sound above me carried down the crash of furniture, the snap of footsteps, men shouting to each other. Dust filled my throat, and my lungs burned, but I kept moving. Then the sharp crack of gunfire rang out, muffled yet close, and I knew they weren't just searching. They were hunting. The passage opened into the woods. Darkness swallowed me whole, broken only by the harsh sweep of headlights through the trees. I ran, stumbling over roots, my breath coming in jagged bursts. Behind me, dogs barked, men shouted. A beam of light cut across my path, and I dropped low, crawling until the trees shielded me again. Just as my strength began to give out, I heard an engine roar to life. A pickup truck skidded to a stop on the dirt road ahead, and a woman's voice, firm and urgent, called out. Her name was Nellie Whitman, though I didn't know it then. All I knew was the steadiness in her eyes, the way she extended her hand without hesitation. I climbed into the cab, and the truck jolted forward. Bullets pinged against the metal as she slammed the gas. Branches whipped past as we tore down narrow back roads, her hands steady on the wheel while I clutched the seat, bracing for each sharp turn. Headlights flared in the rear-view mirror, but Nellie knew the terrain. She cut down paths barely wide enough for the truck, weaving through the dark until the chase faded behind us. When we finally slowed, silence pressed heavy around us. My body shook from adrenaline, my throat raw from breathing too hard. Nellie glanced at me, her face lit by the glow of the dash. There was no judgment in her eyes, only grit and something like compassion. For the first time in days, I felt a flicker of relief. I was no longer running alone. But as the night stretched on, I knew this escape was only the beginning. What we carried now truth, evidence. Survival would have to be tested in a place far more dangerous than the woods. The fight was heading toward courtrooms and headlines, and the real battle was only beginning. The arrests came quietly. No flashing lights, no shouting in the night, just the sound of car doors closing. The calm efficiency of federal agents walking my son-in-law away in handcuffs. My daughter following close behind. I watched from a distance, my heart torn in two. There was no satisfaction in seeing her like that. Only grief that it had come to this, that my own child had chosen greed over blood. The courtroom felt colder than any cell could. The walls, pale and high, seemed to press down on me as I took my place at the witness stand. The air was thick with silence, broken only by the scratch of pens and the shuffle of papers. When I raised my hand to swear in, I felt the weight of every word I was about to speak. This wasn't just testimony, it was my life laid bare. I told the truth about the will, the cabin, the documents, the nights of betrayal I hadn't wanted to see. My voice shook at times, but I held steady. Across the room, my daughter stared back at me, her face a mixture of anger and something I still recognized as fear. It was like looking into a mirror cracked down the middle. I grieved even as I spoke, knowing each word pushed her further away. The cross-examination was brutal. Every detail of my life was pulled apart, every choice questioned. Every doubt pressed into me like a blade, but the truth held. The evidence was undeniable. My husband's records meticulous. When the jury filed back in, the room seemed to stop breathing. Guilty. The word echoed through me, not victory, not triumph, but a hollow sort of closure. Justice had been served, but it was not the kind that heals. It was the kind that leaves scars. As I left the courthouse, I carried no joy, only a quiet resolve. My family as I knew it was gone, but truth had been spoken, and that had to be enough. The chapter was closing, but my life was still unfolding, and I knew the next part of the journey would not be about revenge or betrayal. It would be about rebuilding. That reflection would come in time. But for now, I walked into the cool air, bracing myself for what lay ahead. When the trial was over and the noise of it all began to fade, I returned to the cabin. What once felt like exile became a kind of sanctuary. I cleaned the dust from the corners, mended the sagging porch, and filled the rooms with books, quilts, and the quiet rhythm of my own life. The table that had once been set for one became a place where I wrote letters, painted small canvases, and rediscovered parts of myself I thought I had lost. The cabin taught me something no courtroom ever could, that peace is not handed to us. We have to build it, plank by plank, choice by choice. Betrayal broke me open. But in the cracks, I found resilience. I learned to trust my instincts, even when others tried to silence them. I learned that independence, though heavy at first, can become freedom. There are still nights when grief presses in, when I wonder how my life might have been if love had not turned against me. But those moments no longer define me. Instead, I choose to see myself as someone who walked through fire and came out carrying light. If you take anything from my story, let it be this life will not always protect you from betrayal, but it will always offer you the chance to rise again. And when you do, you may discover a strength you never imagined you had. Thank you for listening to my journey. If my story touched you, share it, leave a comment, or pass it to someone who might need to hear it today. Your voice matters just like mine does, just like yours always will.